Would you hurt someone if a man in a lab coat told you to? You think the answer is obvious. You're kind, rational, in control. But what if you're not? If you've ever walked away from a decision and wondered, why did I say yes? If your gut screamed no, but your lips whispered okay, this is going to change the way you see yourself. Not just others. You. Because behind every cruelty in history, every war crime, office scandal, or viral lie, there isn't always a villain. Sometimes there's just obedience. In 1961, in a quiet lab at Yale, a man pressed a button. The person on the other side screamed. He pressed it again and again until the screams stopped. He didn't hate that person. He wasn't angry. He was just following orders. If you've ever felt like that person pressing the button, just type, "I see the lab coat," and let's begin. Imagine you're in a small room. Fluorescent lights buzz softly overhead. A man in a white lab coat hands you a list of questions and a device with switches. You're told it's a memory experiment. You're the teacher. The man in the other room is the learner. Each time he gives the wrong answer, you press a button, delivering a shock. The first few mistakes are harmless. Mild shocks, small winces. Then he gets another answer wrong. You press again. His voice yells out in pain. You hesitate. The man in the lab coat says, "Please continue." You press again. The learner begs, screams, pounds the wall. "Please stop. I have a heart condition." You freeze. You turn to the man in white. He doesn't raise his voice. He simply says, "The experiment requires that you continue." And you do. You press the button again. And again, because he told you to. This isn't fiction. This happened. Over and over, with regular people, volunteers. 65% went all the way to the maximum voltage. They thought they were killing someone. But the man in the lab coat said, "Keep going." So they did. Why? Why do good people obey horrifying orders? Why do we hand over our morality just because someone above us says so? This is where it begins, with a button, a scream, and silence. There's something terrifying about how calm the man in the lab coat was. He didn't threaten. He didn't yell. He just stood there, steady, and said, "Please continue." And that was enough. This is what psychologists call the authority effect. Our brains are wired to trust symbols of power, uniforms, titles, posture, tone. From the moment we're children, we're taught to obey. Parents, teachers, police, bosses. We learn that questioning authority means punishment, but obeying means safety, approval, reward. In the Milgram Experiment, the white coat became a symbol of truth, of science, of legitimacy. So when he said continue, your brain whispered, "It must be okay." And if something feels wrong, your mind tells you it's not your fault. You were just doing what you were told. That's the trap. The authority figure creates distance between you and the consequence, so you stop feeling responsible. The pain becomes their problem. The command becomes the rule. And suddenly, you're not you anymore. You're just a role, a piece in a machine. This isn't about one experiment. It's about a pattern, from corporate scandals to government cover-ups to genocides, ordinary people doing terrible things. Because someone else wore the coat. We don't obey because we're evil. We obey because we're human. And that's what makes it so dangerous. You don't need a lab coat to obey. Sometimes it's just a manager's tie, a company policy, a group chat saying, "Don't ask questions. Let's leave the lab and step into the office." Imagine this. Your boss asks you to manipulate numbers on a report. Not too much, just enough to make the team look good. You know it's wrong. But he says, "Everyone's doing it, just this once." You hesitate, but then you think, if I don't, I'll be the problem. If I speak up, I'll lose my job. If I obey, no one gets hurt. And so you do it, just like the button. You hit send, and then you do it again next week, and next quarter, and before long, it becomes how things work here. You start telling yourself, it's not my fault, I didn't create this system. I'm just doing my job. Sound familiar? This is how obedience hides in plain sight. It wears a smile, it brings free lunch, it calls itself company culture. But underneath, it's the same reflex. Follow the leader, even when the leader is wrong. Because saying no means risking your place in the tribe, and nothing scares the brain more than exile. So we stay quiet, we nod, we comply, and sometimes we hurt others in the process, all for a paycheck. A promotion, a pat on the back. The question is, at what point do you stop being the employee and start becoming the experiment? Now picture a soldier, boots in mud, gun in hand, eyes scanning the horizon for orders, not enemies. In the military, obedience isn't optional, it's survival. You follow orders without question, because hesitation can cost lives, yours or your brother's. But what happens when the order is wrong? What if you're told to fire on civilians, to destroy homes, to torture prisoners? History is full of these moments. Vietnam, Iraq, World War II, soldiers said, "I was just following orders." That phrase echoes across courtrooms, war tribunals, documentaries. But the psychology is the same. Milgram's lab, now with rifles instead of buttons. Because in war, disobedience can mean court-martial or worse, so even when the gut says no, the uniform says yes, and the uniform always wins. Some soldiers break, some disobey, but most obey, not because they're cruel, but because they've been trained to obey faster than they can think, and the more brutal the environment, the more tightly the system grips their minds. So when history judges them, we must ask, are they monsters or mirrors? And if we'd worn the same boots, would we have marched the same path? You don't need a uniform or a title to hold power. Sometimes all it takes is a screen. Think about the last time you saw breaking news, a health scare, a political headline. Did you question it, or did you trust it? Because it came from them. The media wears its own lab coat, anchors in suits, logos that say trusted or official, music that sounds serious, tickers that scream urgency. It tells you what to fear, what to buy, who to blame. And like Milgram's experiment, you trust because the voice sounds sure, because the graphics look professional, because the camera angle feels powerful. But how often do we stop and ask, who's behind the coat? Who funds this message? Who benefits if I believe it? In 2020, millions believed false health information. Because a doctor-looking figure said it on YouTube. People refused vaccines. People overdosed on fake cures. Not because they were stupid, but because they obeyed the image of authority. We are wired to obey the familiar, the polished, the repeated. And so, in the age of screens, obedience becomes viral. We share posts without reading. We repeat slogans without thinking. We cancel others on command. Because someone said they deserve it, we become enforcers, not questioners. The lab coat is now digital, coded in pixels and confidence, and every day we choose to trust it or tear it off. So ask yourself, is what you believe yours, or was it given to you by someone wearing a very convincing smile? Obedience isn't something we learn in adulthood. It starts the moment we can walk, sit still, say thank you, don't talk back. We're praised for following, punished for resisting. In school, the best students are the quiet ones, the ones who raise their hands, who color inside the lines. We're taught that authority knows best, that asking why too many times is disruptive. And over time, our brains form shortcuts. We stop evaluating every command. We just respond. Psychologists call this automatic compliance. It's like a reflex. You see the lab coat, the badge, the signature line in an email, and your brain says, "Yes, sir." The problem is, that same reflex can be used against you. Scammers impersonate police officers. Companies hide lies behind professional language. Cults disguise control as community because they all know your obedience has been trained, and the more polite, structured, and official they sound, the more likely you are to trust them. But there's something else. When we obey, we feel less responsible. It's called diffusion of responsibility. The moment you say, "I was just doing what I was told," your brain offloads guilt. The damage becomes abstract. Your role becomes small, and that is how ordinary people become part of terrible systems, not with rage, but with routine, not with hate, but with habit. So the real danger isn't in big, evil commands, it's in the tiny ones, the ones that slip by, unquestioned, the ones that turn obedience into identity. But what happens when someone says no? In Milgram's experiment, a few did. They stood up, pushed back their chairs, and refused to press the button. Their hands shook, their voices cracked, but they said, "I won't do this." And they walked out. No applause, no headlines, just quiet defiance. It seems small, but that kind of disobedience is rare and powerful, because saying no is hard. It means confronting authority. It means risking rejection. It means being seen as difficult, uncooperative, rebellious. But every movement that changed the world started with someone saying no. No, I won't sit at the back of the bus. No, I won't follow that unjust law. No, I won't be silent. Think of whistleblowers who exposed corruption and paid the price. Think of soldiers who refused illegal orders and faced prison. Think of employees who stood against toxic cultures and lost their jobs. They didn't always win. They weren't always celebrated, but they disrupted the cycle. They broke the chain between command and compliance. And they proved one thing, like obedience is not destiny. You can interrupt it, you can question it, you can stop it, but only if you choose to. And choosing starts with awareness. So next time your gut says no, listen, because every disobedient act, no matter how small, is a reminder. You are not a button. You are a voice. Look around your life. Who wears the lab coat? Is it your boss, your parent, your culture, your algorithm? We all have them. People, systems, ideas that carry authority in our minds. Sometimes it's a religion. Sometimes it's a mentor. Sometimes it's a way things have always been. And often we don't even notice we're obeying. You nod at the family tradition. You laugh at the sexist joke. You repost the angry meme, not because you believe it, but because you're afraid to push back. Because somewhere deep down, you think, if I resist, I might lose love, respect, belonging. So you go along, you say yes. When you mean no, you stay quiet. When you should speak, you follow. Not out of agreement, but out of fear. But the truth is, every day, you have moments to choose differently, to pause before you agree, to ask, do I actually believe this? To say, no, that's not okay. And you don't need to shout, you don't need to fight. Sometimes it's just a quiet refusal, a skipped email, a turned back head, a breath before you act. Those tiny choices are how you reclaim your power, because the lab coat loses its magic. The moment you realize it's just fabric, the real authority has always been yours. So now you know, obedience isn't about evil. It's about patterns, conditioning, fear. It starts young, gets rewarded, becomes habit. And before you realize it, you're pressing buttons, sending emails, nodding along. Not because you believe, but because it's easier. Because it's safer. But the cost? Your voice, your values, yourself. Every time you obey without question, a part of you fades. And the system grows stronger, but every time you pause, question, resist, you chip away at that machine. You remind the world and yourself that you are not programmable. You are conscious, and that's the beginning of change. It won't be easy. You'll be called dramatic, difficult, disloyal, but it's worth it, because the alternative is a life lived on autopilot. A life where you wake up years later and wonder who made all your choices for you. So today, wake up, look at the lab coats in your life, strip away the illusion, and ask the one question that's been buried. What do I believe? Because obedience is everywhere, but so is freedom.